Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. And guys, we've finally done it. It is episode number 50. Thank you guys so much. I promise I won't go on for too long here because we want to get into the topics, and there is a lot to talk about. I say this almost every week, but it's true. There is a lot to talk about. But before I do that, I just want to say a genuine, heartfelt thank you. The channel has been in such a good place, and that's really nothing to do with the analytics and nothing to do with anything like that, but really because there have been more and more people that have been engaging with these discussions, and it's not even about my own thoughts, it's just about sharing your guys' thoughts, and I've been able to talk with so many of you guys in the comments. I try to respond to every single one, so if you have a thought, even if we disagree, totally fine as long as you go about it respectfully, and we've been having some amazing discussions over the past couple months as the podcast has really ramped up. We've been doing a podcast episode every single week for about 3 months now, and it's just been awesome. So thank you guys so much for all of that. It's really made this whole process so incredibly fun, and I hope to continue to do this, make weekly podcasts as much as possible, even heading into the holiday week. We'll see what happens here. If I have to make an adjustment for next week's episode based on what happens during the holiday week, then we'll see about that. But yeah, we have, again, a lot to discuss here in terms of Gladiator 2. I'm going to review it, and then we're going to talk about other trailers, Minecraft, Elio, and James Gunn talks about DCU CANON. So lots of stuff to talk about here, guys. But before we get into any of it, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, if this is your first time, thank you so much for joining. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, give the video a like, and let me know what you think about any of the topics in the comments down below. If you want to listen to an audio-only format, we have a Spotify feed as well, so make sure to go check that out and let me know, give a rating, and let me know what you think about the Spotify feed as well. Guys, thank you so much for 50 episodes. It has been just a joy, and without further ado, as always, let's get into it. Alright guys, so we're going to start out this podcast with a couple of quick hits, some stories that, probably not going to talk about for more than 5 minutes, but also just wanted to mention because I think they're kind of funny. Or at least this first one's kind of funny, and the next one is a trailer that I just saw that's pretty cute. It's not much to talk about, but not much to talk about in terms of the fact that it's very short. But let's talk about this first story, and that is a Deadpool Christmas special. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up at all, because like I've been always saying on the Access Blockbusters pod, I don't just report news, because honestly, for me, that's pretty boring just to say Deadpool announcement, because also by the time I actually make the video and make the podcast, it comes out days later, so it's not really useful for me to do that. But I like to report and talk about news stories when there's something interesting or some implications to talk about. So really, there's not much to say here other than Ryan Reynolds went on Instagram and posted a video of himself in the Deadpool suit, and it looks like there is a Christmas sled in the background. So looks like they are filming some kind of Deadpool Christmas special. I think also I heard in a report or some website that he and Leslie Uggams, who plays Blind Owl, had been spotted, or they shared a picture on a Christmas set a couple months ago. So, maybe they really have been filming a Deadpool Christmas special and it's just been completely under wraps. Now, the interesting thing about this, though, and the reason that I want to even bring it up in the first place, because I could just end it here. I could just say, are you guys excited for a Deadpool Christmas special? And the answer would probably be yes, because it'd be so funny. Just conceptually, right before I get to the other thing. Conceptually, the idea of a Deadpool Christmas special where he is Santa, this is just what I'm picturing this to be, is where he's Santa and he's delivering gifts to all of the MCU characters. That would be hilarious. Like can you imagine if he delivers a Christmas gift to, I don't know, Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and he gets to Tom Holland's or Peter Parker's door, and he's like, oh, I was supposed to deliver a gift to Spider-Man, but I don't know who you are, because, the whole spell thing. Anyways, there's just a bunch of concepts that could be so funny with Deadpool and the fourth wall breaking that I think would be awesome. But the one thing that's interesting, though, is that you don't just make these kind of productions, these special presentation productions, overnight. The fact that they're filming it now is kind of weird to me, because people might think, oh, they're filming it now and then they're going to release it by Christmas. That's not how these things work. Even for a special presentation, even if unless this thing is like 2 minutes long, in which case I guess maybe you could get it out the door by Christmas, and even then I don't even know if that's possible. But if this is an actual special presentation, kind of like a 20 to 45 minute thing like the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, then this is kind of odd timing, because then it wouldn't make sense to release this until next Christmas, 2025. Maybe that's why they're keeping it under such wraps, because they know they're not going to be able to release it now, and they're just going to have to release it in Christmas 2025, which, I mean, fair, that's fine. But still, it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, that if this is an actual special presentation, which I'd love the Deadpool Holiday Special. Would love it, especially how much I love the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, and also just, again, like I said, the nature of the Deadpool character being able to break the fourth wall. I just think it's kind of interesting, because I don't think if this is happening, we're going to get it for a whole other year. That's just my thoughts, though, because, again, this could totally just be a promotional short that they could have filmed in 3 hours, and then they could release it in a couple weeks. So I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below, though. Would you be excited for a Deadpool holiday special, or maybe not? And when do you think it will come out? Let me know in the comments down below. The other more minor thing I wanted to talk about is the trailer for the newest Pixar film, Elio? Is it Elio? They said it in the trailer and I already forgot. I'm going to say Elio. I think it's Elio. And again, because there are a couple other trailers I wanted to talk about later on in the podcast episode that I think there are some more interesting things to talk about with those, because they're just frankly longer trailers, and also the concepts for those have been discussed for a while. And so we'll dive deeper into those later on in the podcast. But for this Elio trailer, it's really short. And I think they actually had released a trailer for this movie a long time ago. I remember watching something, but to be completely honest with you, I remembered nothing from it. So when I turned on clicked on the YouTube video to watch this trailer, I had no idea what to expect other than something about space. And because that was the concept that I heard about many, many years ago when Disney first announced this movie. And yeah, I mean, it looks cute. I think that there is this really interesting theme, because you're always, when I'm watching a Pixar trailer, right? And maybe this is just the more, jaded side of me, even though it's not jaded because it's looking for the emotional parts. But I'm looking for those moments where I think that Pixar will be trying to get you to cry, Like, what are the parts of the trailer that are pointing to the points in the movie where, that's the part where Pixar is going to get you to cry. And I think this is a movie really about, dreams, and not actual dreams, but sort of following your dreams. Like, what does your heart desire? And I think in that way, I think that, there's a big potential for this film to be very touching. The concepts, the aliens, and sort of the E.T. vibes mixed with a little bit of Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess, being abducted by aliens, and just the cute Pixar-ness. None of it really stands out to me per se, I like conceptually or anything else, but I do think that there is obviously, just with, as with any Pixar movie, there is great potential for, pulling at the heartstrings and being a very emotional film. This comes out in 2025, and, like I talked about before when they announced Incredibles 3, I really like this theme that they have going of original movie, sequel, because I don't think that by us saying, stop releasing all these sequels, which I haven't been saying, I've just been saying, I think there should be a balance, because I don't think it should be completely one or completely the other, because I think that one of the strengths of Pixar is the sequels, actually. And they've been able to make, on balance, they've made incredible sequels. Inside Out 2 was a fantastic movie. Incredibles 2 was awesome. Toy Story 2, 3, 4. I think 4 was great as well. And so, again, I think that they've been able to make really wonderful sequels. And so I think they should keep doing that. They're making Incredibles 3. But I think that obviously also they should continue to make more original movies, because all of these sequels came from original concepts, including most recently Inside Out. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that Elio, I think I said Elio is going to be great, and then maybe we'll see, something else come out of Elio, but we'll get Elio, I think we'll get Toy Story 5, and then we'll get that movie Hoppers, which honestly, that one confuses me. Telepathic Beavers, I think, is what that movie's about. No idea. And then we'll get Incredibles 3, and then, yeah, we'll be on our way. Maybe Inside Out 3 at some point down the road. But, guys, that's the trailer for Elio. Check it out. It's really cute, and, I think that Pixar is getting their swagger back, and so I'm really excited to see what they have in store. So let me know what you thought about the trailer for Elio. It's coming out in summer 2025 in the comments down below. All right, so we have a bit of DCU casting news that, surprise, surprise, doesn't have anything to do with lanterns. Who would have thought that was coming? We actually have another really big name entering the DCU, so we presume. So, that project Sergeant Rock, and if you don't, that's totally fine, because honestly, before I even reported the news, and if I wasn't even doing this podcast, I may not have even known myself, but a few weeks ago, we reported and talked about the new development that there is going to be a DCU film called Sergeant Rock. And now, I should say that it hasn't been officially confirmed that it's going to be part of the DCU proper, although it is being developed by DC Studios. That much we know for sure. But I think it is all but certain that it will be part of the DCU. In what capacity? Who knows? We have projects like Creature Commandos that it might relate to, with Rick Flag Sr. maybe, or something like that. I don't know. But I think that it will have some connections to the DCU, but also maybe not as many as we'd see with Superman or Brave and the Bold, because, Sergeant Rock is a film that takes place, I believe, during World War II. It could be World War I. I think it's World War II. And it follows the character of Sergeant Rock, who is basically a military sergeant. And I don't think he has any superpowers, but it's kind of about his adventures and what he gets up to there. Again, you can go check out the previous segment we did on Sergeant Rock to kind of just discuss the fact that they're making this movie. Now, what's interesting about this movie is that based on the frequency of news that's been coming out, it seems like this movie is going to come out relatively quick. Because James Gunn said recently he was laying out his plans for the rest of the beginnings of the DCU, I should say, Creature Commando, Superman, and then we got Peacemaker season 2. I think he then said we're going to get Lanterns and Supergirl, and then after that there are going to be some projects that we haven't heard about. The other projects that he did announce at that YouTube video, I think a couple years ago now, were things like Swamp Thing, things like Paradise Lost, and Waller, I don't know what happened to that Waller show. So those we know at least were coming at some point, but it looks like other projects have taken precedence. Oh, obviously in Brave and the Bold, the Batman movie. But it looks like, again, other projects have taken precedence because it seems like this Sergeant Rock movie is going to be fast-tracked a little bit. Now, we have confirmation of who is going to be playing him, and it is none other than the last 007, Daniel Craig, otherwise known as Benoit Blanc, in my heart at least. I love the Knives Out and Glass Onion films. But yeah, Daniel Craig is apparently in talks to be playing Sergeant Rock, and he's going to be teaming up with the director. I'm going to butcher his last name. I presume it's Luca Guadagnino. Is that how you say his name? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm probably very wrong. But, Luca, as I've been referring to him as, directed Challengers, I believe, with Zendaya in it recently. And then also is directing a film called Queer, which I believe Daniel Craig is in. So this would be another collaboration between the two. And it's big news because Daniel Craig is a bona fide star. He's not obviously to, the Dwayne Johnson of movie stars, but he has a huge presence on screen. It's Daniel Craig, doing Glass Onion, doing Knives Out, and obviously doing James Bond and doing a bunch of other things as well. He has quite the credibility to him. So having him join the superhero franchise would be really interesting. The other thing in this, because all this comes from Deadline, and Deadline, like I've been saying, is a very reputable source. You can pretty much trust that the Deadline sources are correct. And the other thing that the Deadline article says is that the script is in good shape. So again, this leads me to believe that it will be Superman, the first movie, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, the second movie, and then probably Sergeant Rock, the third movie, which is kind of weird because we haven't really heard much about James Mangold's Swamp Thing. James Mangold is allegedly doing a Star Wars movie before that, so it makes sense that it's not going to come for a long while. And then we have other, movies that, like The Brave and the Bold, is probably going to be after Sergeant Rock with Andy Muschietti. We have also not heard anything about that movie as well. So it's really interesting, right? Because this is a movie that, frankly, I don't know how it fits into the DCU. Maybe it's just something James Gunn wanted to make, and he's making it because it's been a passion of his. That's how he got, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker. Nobody would have really, made those films as the first tentpole films of a new cinematic universe. But hey, they came out and they were great. And now it looks like James Gunn is making whatever he wants to make. And so we'll see how this turns out. But Daniel Craig joining the DCU is very exciting news for sure. So let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think of Daniel Craig joining the DCU as Sergeant Rock? Is this exciting news, or do you think that maybe this is not good casting? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys. So I've said this many times on the channel already. I grew up a Pixar kid. Those were the movies that really made up my childhood. Not even Disney animation. It was mostly, if not exclusively, Pixar for me. That being said, that doesn't mean there aren't other non-Pixar films that have very special places in my heart. I'm talking about animated films in particular, obviously aside from the Star Wars and Marvel films. But, I'm talking about films like The Emperor's New Groove or some classic Disney animated films. Remember watching Tangled and all those other films. And one such film or series of films that always has had a special place in my heart was the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. I remember growing up watching the first couple films when I was much younger, and the third film I watched recently, it came out I think in 2020, something like that, and I'm going to admit I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first two films. The first two films are just spectacular. I love them, especially the first one. The first one will always have a very special place in my heart. So when they announced they were going to be doing a live action How to Train Your Dragon, I was interested. I was intrigued because I was wondering, how are you going to approach this in a way that makes it feel true to the spirit of the source material? Actually, the other question just being, what is the source material? It seems like it's going to be the movie, not the books, because, you have Gerard Butler coming back as Stoic. I think that's his name, Stoic. And so Hiccup's father. And so it seems like they're just going to adapt the movie rather than the book. So it's, that was a question that I had. And also just what the point of this really is, is there a point to it? And I've asked this question before on the YouTube channel with regards to the Disney live action remakes, and some have been more successful than others, obviously, Lion King, Aladdin, Jungle Book, but I think all for very, very different reasons, right? And so I was very curious to now see DreamWorks taking a stab at making a live action How to Train Your Dragon film. So the first trailer has just released. And I have to say this. I have to say it really did tug at my heartstrings for a few reasons. Number one, nostalgia. It looks so faithful to the animated film. And the animated film, like I said, has a very, very special place in my heart. I was wondering, are they going to go a little darker? Just because it's live action, you have Vikings and dragons. How realistic are you going to be? What is Toothless even going to look like? Is he going to look more just like a traditional dragon that's maybe kind of meant to be cuter in this world? They fully just took the CGI Toothless from the CG animated How to Train Your Dragon and put him into live action. And honestly, if that's the aesthetic they're going for, also the guy that's playing Hiccup looks exactly like the animated model of Hiccup. Stoic, is his name Stoic? I don't remember. Anyways, Gerard Butler's character, the dad, looks exactly like he does in the movie. And I was just watching the trailer. I heard the music at the end as well, and it just took me back. I was so heartwarmed is a weird word to say here, but I felt really, I don't know, it just felt so warm and fuzzy inside because I was like, this is awesome, Now, on the other hand, the more cynical side of me, which hopefully doesn't come out too much on this YouTube channel, but the more cynical side of me goes, okay, so then back up. Let's go back to our original questions here. So we have our answer. What is the source material? The source material is obviously the movie because the original movie was very loosely based on the book series that was very popular. I remember reading those books when I was younger as well, but very loosely, mostly just in name and characters only. Those books have, there are many, many of those books, and they've gone on to have all sorts of different stories. So just very loosely based on the books. But it looks like this movie, the live action remake, is going to be very squarely focused on the animated film. I believe, I could be wrong. Is it the same director who did the animated films? I believe so. So this is literally just going to be a remake of that film. And then the next question being, how much of a remake is it going to be? I think we have our answer to that as well. It's almost going to be, just again, based on the trailers, it's almost going to be a shot-for-shot remake. The iconic shot, right, of Hiccup holding out his hand and then turning his head away as Toothless's head goes into it, right? I mean, that's just a direct shot. Obviously, I said the character designs look the exact same, and Toothless looks the exact same. So it has me wondering a little bit, right? What is the point of this movie? This is, again, the more cynical side of me coming out. And the more cynical side would say, well, make money, right? I mean, whatever demographic wasn't coming out to see the animated films because they thought they were kids' films, which, by the way, they are really fun kids' films, but, it's dark. Hiccup loses a leg in the first film. So, yeah, they get pretty dark. But maybe whatever demographic wasn't going to come out for an animated film, and then the nostalgia factor, and, they think, because I believe those films made within the range of $400 million or so. I could be wrong about that. So maybe they're like, this will bump us up to $800 million. I don't know. That's just the more cynical side of me, talking. Because, again, I appreciate that, we're going back to a franchise that I love very dearly and has been, very successful as well. But I also am wondering, why make it literally shot for shot again? Maybe you could just, do a little bit something different. And again, this is only based off of maybe a minute and a half of trailer footage. So who knows? Who knows, right? We'll have to see. But based on my first impressions, like I said, the vast majority of me is very excited because it was just a heartwarming trailer. It was great to see these characters back. I love it. And I hope that this is just as good, if not better, than the original film, honestly. There is a more cynical angle to take as well. But honestly, for now, just because this is such a short teaser trailer, I'm not worried about it that much at all. So guys, let me know in the comments down below. What did you think of the first live action trailer for How to Train Your Dragon? Let me know if you're excited, if you're nervous, or if you have fond memories of the original animated films. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, look, this YouTube channel, I've said this many times, and I'm going to say it many times in the future. This YouTube channel is mostly, if not all, about positivity, right? Doesn't mean that we can't dislike things, doesn't mean that we can't, come out of a movie or a show and be like, I just thought that was really bad. But, I've said it many times. It's really about your own personal experience. And as long as you're not being hateful and, insulting other people for their opinions, et cetera, then it's all part of the joy of, we just want to enjoy as many things as we possibly can. So please hear me when I say, because I'm not one of those channels that just hates on things for the sake of hating on things. I genuinely want every single movie to be amazing because that's a win, right? That's a big win. I don't understand for the life of me why people want to actively hate a lot of movies that come out because unless there's something explicitly, really wrong or heinous or immoral about the movie or something like that, then I just don't understand it. So please hear me when I say, because this channel is not a channel for hate, but that second Minecraft trailer was awful. And I don't cover every single thing that I dislike here on this YouTube channel because it would just be terrible for me to do that and for my own mental health and for my own sanity. But, it's Access Blockbusters, and I feel like we should talk about most, if not all, of the major news and blockbuster media, right? All the big films, the big shows, and all that sorts of stuff. And so when I covered the first Minecraft trailer, this was about a month ago, I think, I said, look, it's not good. And I played my fair share of Minecraft. I was a fan of the game. I haven't really played in a long while, but there's a very certain charm to the game, especially if you've also built Legos, right? It's very much in the same vein of you can build anything you want. You can go exploring as well. You can have your own adventures. It's your world, right? There's something so fun and appealing about an open sandbox kind of game. So as a game, it's awesome, right? There's a reason that it was the number one game for so many years, right? And it had a resurgence, I think, in 2020 or 2021, if I'm not mistaken. But this trailer is just one of the worst trailers I've ever seen. And I'm hoping this movie is better than the trailers make it seem because the movie looks like it could be one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It looks like, first of all, visually, it looks like, and I said this before in the first trailer reaction, but it looks like Danielle Brooks and Jack Black and Jason Momoa are just standing on a green screen reacting to nothing. And visually, all the Minecraft-y stuff looks fine. And I think, honestly, if you just did a CG animated movie, Minecraft movie with, I get it. The avatars don't look that expressive, so make something up, do something a little different, like make the faces more expressive. They've done Minecraft shorts before, or some kind of, I remember they did some kind of short for some Minecraft story or something like that, some RPG, something like that. I don't remember. But, guys, I made the same argument last time around. Legos are not that expressive, and they made it work. They totally made it work. You can make this work. I don't understand the rationale at all behind using real people in this, because if you're going to do it like this, it looks awful. The crafting stuff, there's this one scene where Jack Black, I think, is putting out a bunch of wood logs or something like that. It looks terrible. And even the Ender Pearl stuff, and it's a whole trailer full of, guys, remember that game you really liked? Remember all those things? There's an iron golem. There's you're feeding the dog the bone because that's how you tame a wolf, and Ender Pearls and iron golems, and it turns to knights, all the monsters. It's like, remember this, remember that, remember this, and then nothing else. Just nothing else. And look, like I said, I would love for nothing else than for this movie to just be amazing. The Lego movie, honest, I didn't love the trailers for the Lego movie. I thought they were kind of cringy, honestly, and just too cutesy. Apologies for the sirens in the background, by the way. I watched the Lego movie, and I loved it. Lego movie is one of the best surprises I've ever seen in a theater. I love the Lego movie. And I came out of that movie going, I cannot believe it. Like, this is the same movie from those trailers. So I hope, because look, I don't watch every single movie. Just to be transparent, when I'm a completionist at heart, right? And so eventually, if there's a series like the Marvel universe or the DC universe or even the Sony universe, I'll finish these movies eventually. I saw Morbius eventually. I still, though, haven't seen Madam Web because when the reviews came out for Madam Web and they were just awful, I was like, I just can't do that to myself. Eventually, maybe I will. And so, look, there's a real chance that I don't see this Minecraft movie because if the reviews come out in April, I think April 4th is when it's releasing. If the reviews come out in April and it's like a 0% Rotten Tomatoes, I'm not watching this movie. But let's say that the reviews are like, it's actually pretty good. I would love for nothing more than to walk into this movie and come out of it going, I cannot believe this is the same movie from the trailers because I love it. I would love nothing more. But guys, I have to tell you, this is one of the worst trailers I've seen ever. And I'm just baffled. Honestly, I'm just baffled by a lot of the decisions that they made. It's just such a nostalgia bait. I hate using that term, but it feels like nostalgia is the only thing they have going for this. All the actors don't even look like they want to be there except Jack Black, who, Jack Black is always Jack Black. He's always invested in whatever he's doing, right? But this just looks so bad. And so I can only hope that this movie is going to be something resembling good because the trailers both trailers that we're covering on this podcast have been really bad. So guys, let me know, have you seen the second trailer for the Minecraft movie? A Minecraft movie, I guess is what it's called. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. Maybe you guys enjoyed it more. Maybe I'm just missing something and I'm just jaded and cynical, but I'd love to be wrong. So let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, so The Penguin has wrapped up, and we've done our extensive coverage on the entire series. You can go check out on all the past episodes of the Access Blockbusters pod, as well as just individual segments that I've clipped on the YouTube channel, all the individual spoiler discussions that we've done for The Penguin. It's been awesome. I've loved the show. But then I wanted to transition, almost like we did with Venom: The Last Dance and with Null. I wanted to talk about what comes next, especially with specific characters, right? Because I think it was interesting with Venom: The Last Dance to think about a character like Null and think about what is his place now in the future. And with a character like Null and with a universe that is, let's be honest, as dysfunctional as the Sony universe of Spider-Man characters, it was an interesting question, maybe less so about, oh, it's really exciting that he might show up in Spider-Man 4 or whatever, and more of, is this actually going to happen? We have a little bit of a different case here, though, with Penguin, because obviously, if you didn't like the show, totally fine. But for me and for just so many other people out there, the show was fantastic. And I mean, we loved Oz in The Batman, the 2022 film. And that just led to this amazing show that we got in 2024. Now, The Batman Part 2 is coming out in 2026. So I wanted to take some time here and just talk about what the show had, the ramifications the show might have in The Batman Part 2. Now, a couple things here that I want to discuss, just the more objective things that have been talked about in terms of the reporting. So Colin Farrell has been doing some interviews, obviously, since the end of The Penguin, and he has revealed that as far as he knows, and he has not read a script, is what he said, for The Batman Part 2. Actually, it turns out James Gunn said recently that the script for Batman Part 2 has not been sent to him, so whether it's done or whether it's in whatever stage of doneness it's in, it's not fully ready, it seems like. But Colin Farrell says he hasn't read the script. However, he was told by Matt Reeves that he would have 5 or 6 scenes in the Batman Part 2, and that also he signed up for 3 Batman films. And also, on top of that, Matt Reeves, ever since the end of the Batman Part 2, at the end of The Penguin, has been making the rounds and basically been saying, yeah, we'd be really interested, and there's early discussion about a Penguin Season 2. So that's all really interesting. Let's add on top of that fact that, yes, spoiler alert for The Penguin if you haven't seen it, but Oz obviously survives. Not only does he survive, but he is the kingpin of Gotham's crime at this point, which makes sense, right? I mean, at the end of the Batman Part 1, you see Oz kind of looking over the city, and then we transition right into the show. But if you just went from the Batman Part 1 to the Batman Part 2, I think it would make a lot of sense, right? He seemed like he was going to be on top at the end of the Batman, and he is on top at the beginning of the Batman Part 2, which is what I presume. But there's a whole journey that happens in between there. But I think that for people who didn't watch the show, you'd be able to catch up pretty quickly. Now, the other interesting thing to think about here in terms of catch up and in terms of other things that you might have missed in The Penguin if you hadn't seen it is Sophia Falcone, because her entire character is developed in this one show, and yet she's kept alive at the end of The Penguin, and she receives a letter from a Batman character, Selena Kyle, obviously Catwoman, who is her half-sister as well. And so it remains to be seen, because I would think that Zoe Kravitz has a role to play in the Batman Part 2, one would think. It doesn't seem like they'd just be, parting ways and then you'd never hear from her again. So, I mean, it's possible. And then it's possible that maybe we get a Catwoman, Sophia Falcone series or something like that. Who knows? But I think that it's much more likely that we will see Catwoman come into play in the Batman Part 2. Now, these are the objective facts, right? These are the things that are true. And now we kind of have to extrapolate from here as to what we think will happen. And I guess the other thing I should mention is that the bat signal was looming over Gotham City at the end of The Penguin. Whether or not that indicates that Batman knew Penguin was behind all these things, or whether or not it was just more in response to the chaos that was happening with the gangs and the bomb that went off near Crown Point and all these other things, who knows? It's that part is not clear. But I think we have a lot of interesting things to then go off of and extrapolate on in terms of what actually comes next. So let's think about this. And I'm going to do this in a couple ways here. I want to talk about just in general what I am thinking and maybe even hoping for from The Penguin to the Batman Part 2. And then I'll give maybe a percentage of what, how likely I think it is that we'll see Oz in the Batman Part 2. For the select amount of scenes that I think he's going to appear in, because obviously I think it's pretty clear he will appear in the Batman Part 2, but I want to give a percentage of, I think it's going to be X% that we see Oz in the Batman Part 2 for X amount of time, And then I also want to give a percentage about how likely it is that we'll see Sophia Falcone, because I think that that's a little bit more up in the air, to be honest. So we'll talk about that. But before we get into that, I wanted to just give, general thoughts, like general impressions of what I think will happen based on the end of The Penguin and leading into the Batman Part 2. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think that much. I think the Batman Part 2 will be focusing on a different story, and I don't think Penguin will be the villain, the ultimate villain of the Batman Part 2. He might be for the Batman Part 3, maybe, or something like that. But I think that based on Colin Farrell saying he only has 5 or 6 scenes, I don't think that Penguin will have a major role, because I think in the original Batman, he only had about 5 or 6 scenes. Now, the word scenes is really interesting because scenes are you can kind of play fast and loose with that word, right? Scene could be something like a 30-second interaction between two characters, or it could be an entire car chase. Like I would consider, and maybe this is wrong of me, but in the Batman, I would consider that entire car chase between Penguin and Batman one scene, even though it's comprised of literally multiple scenes. But I don't think that they're referring to 5 or 6 scenes as in literal shots, right? I think that it's more just the story beat that they're on, right? And that's actually not a small amount of screen time. I think Oz in the first film had maybe 25 to 30 minutes of screen time, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have a similar amount of screen time in the Batman Part 2. I think more so than just being the ultimate villain, what I imagine for Oz, just based on the fact that he is now on top of Gotham, is that he might be making more of a political run, as well as doing, being that linchpin for all of the underground dealings that are going on here. Because he's trying to play it, have his cake and eat it too, right? He's trying to say, I want to maybe have some more political power, like he was saying to that commissioner guy, the politician, not commissioner, but the councilman, right, in Gotham. And I think that is something that we might start to see here, is a corrupt politician rising to power, but also the fact that he might be the broker for whatever's going on. Now, we don't know at this point who the villain of the Batman Part 2 is, so it could be anybody. It could be someone not even related at all to Penguin, but I have a suspicion that Penguin is going to play the role of broker for whoever this villain is and whatever he or she or they are up to in the Batman Part 2. So that's what I think Penguin's role is going to be. But I think 5 or 6 scenes, it makes sense. I don't think he's going to be the big villain. And I think that, we might have a lot more to explore in a Penguin Season 2. So I think that's where Penguin stands. Now with Sophia Falcone, I'm interested to see what they have, going on for her, because, and this is the thing about doing television shows that are canonical to your universe. This is what I talked about maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago in the, previous episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, is that you have to be very careful with how you treat these characters. And Marvel has obviously stumbled, and we'll see how the DCU, James Gunn's DCU, handles this. But you have to be careful, because just bringing over television characters into live action and assuming that the audience member knows everything that's going on about them is a very faulty assumption. And it backfired big time, I think, with the Marvels, for example. And even with WandaVision to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, even though WandaVision quality-wise was incredible by most accounts, by most people. But it's just the fact that people were like, wait, I didn't watch the show. What's going on in this movie? I don't quite get the things that are going on in this movie. Like I've been saying, I think the Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America Brave New World is going to be a more seamless transition, because I think that you can just go from the end of Endgame to be like, okay, now he has the shield, now he's Captain America. I think people who just watch those trailers could be like, oh, that makes sense to me. He's Captain America now, and we move on, right? That makes sense to me. But I think that, in having an entirely new character, and again, an amazing new character in Sophia Falcone, but a new character, you kind of run the risk of having her be a big part of this movie by having to reset up the character again in the Batman Part 2. It's going to be dangerous if Matt Reeves just assumes, oh, everyone will figure it out and everyone will know. So, to be honest, I think that there is actually maybe less than a 50-50 shot that Sophia Falcone appears in the Batman Part 2. And we'll go through the percentages right now, that my particular percentages right now, but I would give it a much lower percentage than I think I would, having Oz have a prominent presence in the Batman Part 2. So, in terms of Oz, I would give Oz a 75% chance that he is one of the major side villains in the show. And, we're just taking that 5 or 6 scenes kind of comment here, and based on where he is at the end of the Batman, or at the end of the Penguin, I would give it maybe a 75% chance that he is pretty much about the same level of importance as he was in the Batman Part 1 of being kind of the main side villain, right? And at this point, for those of us who have seen the show, it's going to be more poignant and it's going to be more impactful because we understand who he is and what his motivations are. But even for people who haven't seen the show, I think it should be more interesting because they've seen the Batman Part 1 and now they're going to get the character more developed. So I think 75%. In terms of whether or not Sophia Falcone will even show up in the Batman Part 2, and I'm not even talking about a cameo. I'm talking about more having a couple scenes in the show, for example. I would give it maybe a 1 in 3, 33% chance that she shows up. I still don't think it's super likely, just again, because of the heavy lifting that they're going to have to do here for this character and just explaining why she's in Arkham and who she is and all these kinds of things. But it's not impossible, right? Because Carmine Falcone was a big part of the Batman. And so just, maybe it's a quick scene of having to explain, okay, she's Carmine's daughter, and then, she had to run out with the Penguin and all these kinds of things. Who knows, right? Maybe Selena Kyle is the one who explains all these things to Bruce Wayne, But I give it maybe a 1 in 3 chance here that we see her in the Batman Part 2. Now, the final thing I wanted to touch upon is that whether or not we're going to get a Penguin Season 2. And I have to imagine, I'm going to give it something like an 85% chance because I think the Penguin will get all sorts of Emmy considerations. And because of Colin Farrell's comments about saying, well, I signed up for 3 Batman films, I don't think the Penguin is going to die in the Batman Part 2. Could be totally wrong. Maybe he just signed a contract that said 3 films and they're going to kill him off in the Batman Part 2. Who knows? If it fits for the story, it works, that's great. But I suspect that at this point, there's a very high likelihood we're going to get a Penguin Season 2. So there is that. Guys, let me know in the comments down below, do you think that Penguin will have a major role in the Batman Part 2? Do you think Sophia Falcone will even show up? And do you think that there will be a Penguin Season 2? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, so as we close out 2024 and head into 2025, it's about time we start talking about what's coming up in 2025, and it's really exciting because I've done some podcast episodes previewing why I think 2025 will be a great year for movies and TV, but it's starting to get real. And along with all of that comes, of course, news, and we have our first official synopsis, it seems like, for the Fantastic Four First Steps. Now, I actually originally wasn't going to cover it because, on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, on the Access Blockbusters pod, I don't like to cover news just for the sake of news, like, oh, new picture of Deadpool in Deadpool costume. That's not really what I'm here for. I would much rather cover something if I believe it's trying to say, or it has something else to say, if there are more interesting things to glean from it, and if I can maybe give some analysis and talk about my feelings about this. So honestly, when I was reading this first synopsis for Fantastic Four First Steps, I initially was going, no, I don't think we need to talk about this until we get to the end, because the beginning is very generic, and I was like, okay, so nothing really here. But the more you get into the synopsis, the more interesting it gets, and the more implications it might have for what the story could be. So I wanted to talk about it pretty briefly here and see what we can gain from this plot synopsis. So I'm going to start here. The article that I have here from the Direct, it's broken up into 3 parts, and I think that actually works really well because we can talk about the 3 different parts. But I wanted to start just reading the synopsis, part 1, and then talking about my thoughts, part 2 talking about my thoughts, and then part 3 talking about my thoughts, and seeing if we can't, get something out of this. So here we go. The first chunk of the Fantastic Four First Steps plot synopsis, and it's not. Again, it's pretty generic, right? This first part here. It's more just the marketing part of it all. So this is what it says. Quote, set against the vibrant backdrop of a 1960s-inspired retro-futuristic world, Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four First Steps introduces Marvel's first family. Reed Richards / Mr. Fantastic, Pedro Pascal, Sue Storm / Invisible Woman, Vanessa Kirby, Johnny Storm / Human Torch, Joseph Quinn, and Ben Grimm / The Thing, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, as they face their most daunting challenge yet. Okay. So that's the first part. Again, very generic. Most of what is interesting about this quote is what we already knew. It's set in a 1960s inspired retro-futuristic world. In an alternate universe is not what it says here, but it pretty much is implied, and we all know that that's what's going to happen. So here, nothing that interesting. And again, like I said, when I first read this, I was going, this isn't really that interesting. But then we get into the second part and the third part. So the second part of the synopsis goes like this. Quote, forced to balance their roles as heroes with the strength of their family bond, they must defend Earth from a ravenous space god called Galactus, Ralph Ineson, and his enigmatic herald, Silver Surfer, Julia Garner. Okay, so that's more interesting, right? Because now we get a sense of what's actually going on here. First of all, Galactus, it seems like, is going to be the main villain of the Fantastic Four First Steps. Maybe that was obvious, maybe not. Because, Galactus has been used in the past as just sort of an entity, right? Just this looming threat, while other villains like Silver Surfer, other Fantastic Four villains, Doctor Doom, are the main central focus points of those films and those comic book storylines. But it seems like here, it is very clearly Galactus that is going to be the main threat of the Fantastic Four First Steps. That's really interesting. Also interesting that they started out this quote by saying, forced to balance their roles as heroes with the strength of their family bond. Again, I think that's all encouraging because, you want to emphasize the fact that they are a family and that they are, these are superheroes, but they also mean a lot to one another as people. I think that is a really good thing to focus on as well. And enigmatic herald, Silver Surfer, Julia Garner obviously, playing, I forget the name of this Silver Surfer compared to the traditional male Silver Surfer. They have actual names. I totally forgot what they are. I think Shyla Ball, something like that. But anyways, it's another confirmation that we're going to be getting some Silver Surfer stuff going on here as well. But the third part of the synopsis is honestly what caught my attention the most. So here is the last little bit of the synopsis that has been released. It says, quote, "And if Galactus's plans to devour the entire planet and everyone on it weren't bad enough, it suddenly gets very personal." Okay, now that's really interesting, right? Because again, it's a very vague quote in the sense of, sure, that could mean a whole lot of things. It could mean anything, right? It could mean Galactus eats one of Reed Richards' cousins and it gets very personal. It could mean that, Galactus takes Ben Grimm prisoner. It could mean a whole host of anything. But my mind immediately jumps to one thing, because what is, other than the family part of it, right? When you think about Fantastic Four and you think about personal stakes, what is the one character that usually jumps to mind? It would be Victor Von Doom, right? Because Victor Von Doom, the traditional backstory between Victor Von Doom and Reed Richards is that they were best friends growing up, and then they formed this rivalry, and Victor always feels like he has been slighted and wronged by Reed, and it's a very personal kind of feud that's going on between these two characters. So interesting, because again, it suddenly gets very personal, could allude to a whole host of things. But, one can't help but wonder, does this hint at maybe a Doctor Doom appearance in Fantastic Four First Steps, more than just the presumed cameo or presumed, and we're talking about the Robert Downey Jr. version, because who knows, maybe Robert Downey Jr.'s version shows up somewhere else. Maybe this could be a different version of Doctor Doom, who knows? But, other than maybe the presumed cameo or post-credit scenes, could this mean that Doctor Doom has more of a role here than we thought? Again, it could be anything, right? It could be Galactus takes half the family hostage, Galactus kills somebody that they care about, but it's interesting that it seems to contrast, right? Galactus's plan to, quote, Galactus's plan to devour the entire planet and everyone on it weren't enough, right? That's sort of the contrast of the first part. And then the second part, quote, "It suddenly gets very personal." So I wonder what that could mean, because I think that actually is our window into some of the more surprising elements of this film and what they could mean. I think it's still 50-50 whether or not that's referring to Doom at all, but we'll have to see about that. Guys, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of this first synopsis for the Fantastic Four First Steps? Do you think it means Doctor Doom is showing up, or maybe not? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, it's crazy, but the good times, the good television times, I should say, keep on rolling, because right after The Penguin ended, it's basically zero break. We went from the finale to The Penguin, and then HBO decided, you know what, you deserve some more good TV. And so literally the next week when, a Penguin episode 9 could have come out, we get Dune Prophecy episode 1. So much good television to talk about. This is going to be a spoiler discussion of episode 1 of the new HBO series, Dune Prophecy, obviously in the same franchise as the recent Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 films from Denis Villeneuve. So really excited to be able to talk about a new series that I hope will be just as good, if not better, than The Penguin. But honestly, it doesn't have to compare to The Penguin. Just, a really good television show would be awesome here as well. So this is your spoiler warning. If you have not seen episode 1 of Dune Prophecy, make sure to save this video, save this podcast, save this segment to watch later, and then come back once you have seen the first episode of Dune Prophecy. Guys, let's get into this. It's a new show. So right off the bat here, because this is a newer show, right? A new, and even though it's part of the Dune franchise and I'm a little bit familiar with the Dune lore, it's still, you still have to get used to new characters and figure out new names and new planets and all these other things that are going on here. And so just to give a little bit of a background here, just as I did in my immediate reaction to episode 1 of Dune Prophecy, this is sort of my familiarity with the Dune franchise. I have read the first 2 books, Dune and Dune Messiah. I also, and obviously Dune, the first Dune book having been the adaptation of the, Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 of the movies, and then Dune Part 3 is going to probably be Dune Messiah, so there's that. And other than that, I don't really have an extensive knowledge of Frank Herbert's lore, and, other than what the books have said, because the movies don't really have time to delve into the Machine Wars and the Orange Catholic Bible and all these other things that have gone on. And so it may not be obvious, right, to people who have just seen Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2, but Dune, the films Dune, take place thousands of years after our modern times. People may not have even known, in fact, that the Dune franchise takes place in a futuristic world that is supposed to be our universe and our world. I actually, when I first started reading Dune, I had kind of assumed that it was just an alternate universe or whatever. But it turns out that Dune takes place in a very, very, very distant future. And so Dune Prophecy picks up immediately. We get that little text after the prologue that this takes place 10,000 years before the birth of Paul Atreides. And so we definitely have a lot of space to work with here, which I think is really exciting because, this is something I've said about Star Wars, right? And that Star Wars has the same room as a franchise like Dune to maneuver around and do what it wants, in a space like this, which I think is exciting, for this kind of franchise. So, there is that. So as we begin this episode, and I always like to do a kind of breakdown of the episode, I took some notes as always, and just trying to, get the best, understanding of the episode as we're going along, and want to convey to you my experience of watching this episode kind of in real time. But, before I even started the episode, I was thinking, okay, so I'm really, I'm kind of curious, right, to see how this show does or does not fit into the tie into the movies, right? It has the visuals of the Dune franchise, just even right off the bat, it has pristine visual quality and just very intentional shots and great CGI on the planets and things like that. But really curious, how is this going to fit into the overarching Dune storyline? So we immediately start off this story. It's being told from the perspective of a Harkonnen. Now, this is Valia Harkonnen, as we're introduced to her. But it was interesting because as I was watching, I was like, why is the woman's voice, I was presuming a little bit older when we're getting this younger Valia Harkonnen who is much younger, who has a much younger voice, right? And so I was like, okay, interesting. So this is being told in retrospect. And I kind of figured that they were going to do a little bit of a prologue here and then skip ahead in time. It is customary with a franchise like Dune, with a series or a movie set in this universe, that there are a lot of names. There are tons of names to go through. And so even I was sort of getting a little bit confused, and as someone who is familiar with the Dune lore, the Bene Gesserit, the Harkonnens, and the Atreides, and Fremen, and Seleucus Secundus, and all these other things. Even I was getting a little bit confused. But what I think this show does a really good job of, actually, I hope. You'll have to let me know in the comments down below if you haven't seen any of the Dune movies, if you have only seen the Dune movies but haven't read the books, if the names were confusing, if the the planets were confusing. I'd love to hear actually a variety of different perspectives, even from people who have read all the Dune books, because I think that for me, as somebody who is not a diehard, hardcore Frank Herbert, Dune fan, I still really appreciated what was going on. But just like how I had the experience when I first read the Dune book, it was a bit dense and a bit confusing at first, but eventually you kind of get on board and you kind of understand what's going on. So we start out here with this mother, right? This is the, I forget the exact title here, but the what Lady Jessica becomes, I guess, later on in Dune Part 2, and her name is Raquel. And so this is now they're going through this narration of explaining what the Bene Gesserit breeding program is, which is, it's pretty messed up, right? I mean, there's an acknowledgement here that it is a very messed up thing, that they're trying to control the bloodlines and, get the right leaders on board. It's a very messed up program here. And what's interesting is that it seems like the crux of this show is that they want a sister, a sister of the Bene Gesserit to be on the throne eventually, which is, I guess, their hopes are on Inez. And so we'll have to see where that goes there. Also very interesting that the mother of the sisterhood is a Harkonnen. I wonder if that will play out. Again, if you know the answers to these, because if this is based on some prequel book that Frank Herbert wrote, I don't know any of this, so I'm just going off of what I know. That's why I give the context earlier. But I think it's really interesting that we're focusing in on a Harkonnen. We also get an Atreides later on, and we get plenty of references to Arrakis. So as I said in my immediate reaction, this isn't, obviously this takes place 10,000 years before Paul Atreides, but there are plenty of commonalities, common markers between the franchises, right? Between the different points in the franchise. Fremen are referenced, Arrakis. You obviously see sandworms, which look the exact same as they do in Dune. You obviously have the Emperor. Seleucus Secundus, for those of you who don't know, is where the Sardaukar, the Imperial guards from Dune, are trained, and all these different things, right? All these things that are connecting to one another. And the Harkonnen, obviously Valia and Tula Harkonnen are on top in terms of the Bene Gesserit, so that's really interesting. So yes, we're following a younger Valia Harkonnen, and then we get to see. So the mother sees a vision. She sees a sandworm, and she sees a massive sandworm. By the way, it's a crazy sandworm that kind of swallows up a whole city or a whole building, and then she dies. So I guess, before she dies, she gives a warning to Valia, and she's basically like, there's going to be a tyrant, and there's going to be a sandworm, and all these kinds of things. It's a little vague, it's Dune prophecy, right? So a lot of these things are based on things that they're expecting to happen in the future. A little bit vague, but we'll have to see how that plays out. I don't know what tyrant she's referring to, maybe Paul, I don't even know. But that's interesting. And so then she gives the succession of the motherhood to Valia Harkonnen, which is not quite popular, as we'll see very soon. And Valia makes it very clear that she wants one of the sisters to rule the Imperium. And so then we get this confrontation between a character named Dorothea, I think, who is very opposed to this, and she pays with her life because the voice, right? It seems like this is one of the origins of the voice, where Valia is using the voice here to basically murder a sister, and that is crazy. It was quite unexpected, and so, but I think I was not. Let me say this. I was not too convinced by the younger Valia, because at first I was like, is this the character that we're going to be following? She didn't quite have that presence that I think a character like Rebecca Ferguson had in Dune, for example, as part of the Bene Gesserit. But I think that seeing the factions within the sisterhood was really interesting, and seeing how the young Valia played within, her coldness, right? Her willingness to use the voice to murder the other sister. But I think that I was a little bit not sold, I guess, on this younger version of Valia. Now, the Emily Watson version, the older version that we're following in the main timeline, I guess, the present day timeline, I was much more convinced about. I was like, okay, this is a character that I think knows what she's doing, but I think is also blindsided by ambition. I think is much more convincing to me as a character. But anyways, we'll get there in just a second. So they talk also about this breeding index, right? Which I guess is sort of their key to their power of, knowing which bloodlines they want to mix. And again, it's messed up. There's an acknowledgement here that it's a completely messed up thing, but this is sort of what the Bene Gesserit are doing. And this is why they were so mad at Lady Jessica, because they had this whole program ready, and then Lady Jessica decides, no, I'm gonna give birth to the Kwisatz Haderach, or however you pronounce it, Paul Atreides, right? So yeah, really interesting stuff. Honestly, I mean, even at the beginning, right, when we're still setting up stuff, I was still like, there's a lot of intrigue going on here, and I was very curious to see what was going on. So anyways, like I mentioned, Valia uses the voice to murder Dorothea, and that was, very vicious. It was almost like a Sophia Falcone kind of moment. I was kind of wondering, is this going to kind of parallel Sophia in that way? Or are we going to follow a character that, we're kind of rooting for, but also is very morally ambiguous? It's probably the case, who's quote unquote doing the right thing, but doing the wrong thing. We'll have to see about that. So yeah, it's a lot of just trying to get your bearings, especially in this prologue section here. And we skip forward 30 years later. It's, 10,000 years before Paul Atreides. And here we go. So we get now a little bit more context here, right? So the princess's half-brother is preparing the princess to come to the sisterhood. He's creepy. He's very creepy. I don't like this character at all. Constantine is his name. Yeah, something suspicious about him. I really don't like him at all. And I wonder if he has a bigger role to play later on in the show. He's just a little creepy. But anyways, the space visuals are very good, as we see spaceships flying to Seleucus Secundus, which is, where the Emperor is and where the Sardaukar will be. And, Constantine and the princess, they meet up, Princess Inez, and they just have a very, very weird relationship. I don't like it. It's just creepy. I know I've said that, but just creepy. We get introduced also to the swords master, who I forget his first name, but he was an Atreides, because later on, I think in the episode, they mentioned that this guy is an Atreides. So very interesting there. And, with what happens between the swords master and Inez later on in the episode, I wonder if that, because this is a breeding program, I wonder if, again, keeping the channel family friendly, but I wonder if this has some implications for what the Bene Gesserit were going to do, and maybe they didn't want this, and now there's going to be a whole wrench thrown in their plans. Seems like at the end of episode 1, a lot of wrenches are being thrown in Valia's plans, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes in episode 2. So anyways, we're introduced to Mark Strong here, and it's also interesting, as this other guy who ends up being the father of that 9-year-old boy who marries, or I guess was going to marry Inez. Now we'll see what happens with that. But this guy is talking about Arrakis, and he's like, hey, just so you know, Emperor, you still have all these problems with the Fremen on Arrakis and all these sorts of things. It's interesting, right? Because it's interesting to think about 10,000 years before the events of Dune, that the Emperor is still having pretty much the exact same problems on Arrakis 10,000 years ago. Quite interesting. I wonder if that'll play a part in, maybe that'll, explain something or the other, but yeah, we'll have to see about that. Then we get back to Wallach 9, which is where the Bene Gesserit are training. It's very Jedi temple-like, kind of indoctrinating kind of stuff, but also very regimented and a lot of intense training. We get kind of a little bit of a subplot here. I think that is also very interesting. So then we get introduced to a character named Desmond Hart, who I was not expecting at all to be that important. I just thought, oh, this is just a guy from Arrakis, kind of like a Jason Momoa, Duncan Idaho, or Gurney Halleck. But no, he becomes very important later on, and I guess he's the villain of the series. We'll have to see about that. But new subplot, because he discusses an attack on the Imperium, and he says it was not from the Fremen, but it was from allied houses. And now I'm suspecting that somehow he was able to lie, because was it Kasha? Was that the sister's name that who died at the end of the episode? I think she says that he's telling the truth. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll have to see, because somehow he got out of telling the truth, or he did tell the truth, or something, because it seems like he was lying now. But yeah, he basically tells the Emperor that these attacks on the house Carino, that the Emperor is part of, was attacked by allied houses and not by the Fremen. So it's really, really interesting. We're also introduced to this idea that Inez is going to be married to that little boy, and it's political marriages, and also just more exposition about the fact that the Emperor himself was married to his wife for political reasons, very similar to how Irulan, Florence Pugh, is being married to Paul Atreides for political reasons. But, you know, Zendaya's character Chani is obviously Paul's true love and all that sort of stuff. It's really interesting, right? I think if you read the Dune books, and you can get a lot out of just the fascinating intrigue and the different espionage aspects and betrayals and house lineages. And it is very Game of Thrones-ish, I will say. And so then we get, you know, more scenes between Tula and Valia as they're kind of scheming about the right pairing and preparing for the princess to come to Wallach 9 to become a part of the sisterhood. You know, should be interesting. I wonder if that's still going to happen based on what happens at the end of this episode with the prince, or the little boy, dying, and also the sister dying, but we'll see. We'll see about that. And then, yeah, the sister who was Kasha, I think is her name, who was bonded with Inez, is just convinced that they're heading down the wrong path. And, you know, Tula and Valia are not believing her, but turns out she was absolutely right, and she pays with her life for that. And yeah, really, really scary. And she sees a really interesting vision. I wasn't able to quite get every single shot, or, you know, figure out exactly what was going on here. Maybe I'll have to look back on it. I'm sure there are going to be breakdown videos that explain exactly every single shot that was going on there. But yeah, I'm curious to see how much of it actually pays off later on in a real, tangible way. So then we get this wedding from the Richese house, which is where the little boy comes from. And I mean, it's creepy. It's supposed to be creepy, but just seeing a 9-year-old, I think they say it's 9 years old, 9-year-old boy marrying a young woman, you know, it's weird. And I'm sure it's supposed to be weird, but it is weird. I just have to point that out. Anyways, yeah, so we're still getting a lot of this build up, and I said here in my notes at this point that, you know, there does need to come a point where the show has to take off. But for the time being, I think that I was just still very on board with all the world building that was going on, and we'll see where we go from there. So we get the wedding scene, and then this boy has this kind of robot lizard thing, and I was a little bit confused about that. I was like, why is everyone freaking out about this? But then they explain that this is a thinking machine, because they had just finished up the war with the machines, and, you know, obviously that was the big impetus for all the factions and all the wars and whatnot. And so obviously, if that is going to be playing a part in the series, you obviously would be very suspicious of a faction of a house that still has these machines. So I think that is really interesting. Just another layer on top of all the, you know, the interesting politics that are going on here as well. Then Desmond talks to the Emperor and kind of talks about the gods, which is really interesting. I'd never really heard about the gods in this Dune franchise, so I wonder what that's going to happen there. And then we get into, I guess, you know, Inez wants to go party, and so this is the first mention, I think, where the swordsman is called an Atreides. So I think that was my first clue of, oh, very interesting. And yeah, again, keeping the show family friendly, but you know what happens next if you've seen the episode. And I think that that's interesting, because I wonder if that has anything to do, you know, again, if that thwarts what's going on with the Bene Gesserit and whatnot here. I wonder, you know, because I think that is all going to be very interesting. And I think that these things are going to tie together. Or even just the fact that there's a romance between the Atreides and the Corino, I think it's Corino line. And it was supposed to be with that little boy and his family line, but we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Also, the fact that they're leaning way more into this idea of, I think it was spice that they're using, you know, spice is a drug, because that's really what it is. I mean, they don't really touch on it in the movies, but spice is a drug, basically. And that it's way more obvious in the books as well, but I guess I don't know. I guess they're touching on this more in the series, which is interesting. So then the Emperor wakes up and he sees, you know, I guess he sees a sandworm, and I wasn't able to tell if that was Desmond, but it's kind of being intercut with the fact that Desmond reveals himself to be the villain. I guess he can can he control sandworms or what? I'm still confused about what happened there on Arrakis, but then he just basically kills the child, and he kills Kosh. I literally, it's all the names. I need to get all the names straight before episode 2. But he kills the Bene Gesserit sister, and it looks like he's the villain of the show. I don't know why. I'm sure we'll get an explanation as to why, and I'm sure Arrakis will be a very important part of it, just as it was last time. Last time being Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2. And that's the end of the episode, guys. I think, look, like I said, based on this spoiler discussion as well, I hope it's evident. There's a lot of setup going on here. But I think all of it's really interesting, and I think with a show like this that has so much intrigue, I think that setup is necessary. I do. I think that if every single episode is like this and there's just no payoff, I think it's not going to be worth it. But I think for now, I'm super on board with this. Again, this is not the best episode I've ever seen of television. It's not like the Penguin episode 3 or episode 4. It's not even like the Penguin episode 1, which the Penguin episode 1 itself, I was like, whoa, this is different. We're going. This episode is not like that, but I think that it's setting up a different kind of show with a very, similar kinds of characters, right? With characters that are morally ambiguous. Like Inez, I think, has her own ulterior motives or her own interests, and obviously Valia Harkonnen has her own interests, and the Emperor has his own interests, and I think that's all going to play a big part into how this series is going to go. So guys, what did you think about episode 1 of Dune Prophecy? Did you enjoy it? Are you on board? Maybe not on board? Let me know in the comments down below. What are you looking forward to in the coming episodes? And yeah, let me know what you're excited about. I'm excited about the next couple episodes and the rest of the series, and I hope you guys are as well. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, let's talk about Gladiator 2. So just as a preface to all this, before we dive into the non-spoiler review actually, first non-spoiler always, and then spoiler review, just wanted to say, I know Gladiator and Wicked are coming out on the same day. I decided to watch Gladiator 2 first simply because of logistics, because I actually have plans to watch Wicked as of right now with some other people later on, and they wanted to wait a little bit, so totally fine. So we're going to watch Wicked in a little bit, hopefully during the holidays, and then we'll talk about Wicked in the next episode of Access Blockbusters Pod, hopefully. In fact, I might have even been more excited for Wicked than Gladiator 2, but, plans are plans, and so really excited to see Wicked with some people. But I got to see Gladiator 2, and we're talking about it here on this week's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. So we are going to do a non-spoiler and then a spoiler review. So if you have not seen Gladiator 2, which I would wager, probably about 50-50 maybe of the audience has not seen Gladiator 2, and then the other half has. So we're going to do non-spoiler for a little bit, and then we're going to go into full spoilers. I know, just also to preface, that the trailers have, I'm not going to say spoiled, because I watched all the major trailers, and I learned some things from those trailers that I thought, oh, interesting. And sure, if you haven't seen the trailers, if you don't really know anything at all except for the first Gladiator film, then yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything in the trailers, because normally I would consider everything in the trailers to be fine to talk about in non-spoiler, but there are a couple things in those trailers that I'm not going to talk about just because, I don't know, maybe in case you just didn't know about these things. And I think that these are relatively big plot points that are not going to ruin the movie if you know about them before. It didn't ruin the movie at all for me, but just not going to talk about them. So we're going to be kind of vague. We're going to really refer to these characters by the actors' names, because I'll get into more specifics just with the characters themselves in the spoiler review. So Gladiator 2. I actually was somebody, just for a little bit of context, who had seen the first Gladiator film relatively recently, and I actually had seen the director's cut, so honestly, I have not seen the theatrical cut. I don't really know what's different about it, but I really enjoyed Gladiator. I mean, obviously, it is one of the greatest films made, by consensus, by critics, and by most people, it's one of the greatest films ever made, and I agree, it's just a fantastic movie. It's got great stakes. Russell Crowe is amazing. You got all the other characters, Joaquin Phoenix is Commodus, and Connie Nielsen. It's fantastic stakes, and it's got good drama, and it's obviously got action, and it's just a well-told story, right? And so when they announced they were going to do a Gladiator 2, I think when they announced they were going to do a Gladiator 2, I hadn't seen the first Gladiator, so I was just kind of like, what is there to tell for about based on what I knew about the first Gladiator going into the second one? After having seen the first Gladiator, I was like, I still don't really get it, because spoilers for the first Gladiator film, which came out 24 years ago, but Maximus dies, and Rome is kind of put into a place of some kind of peace, I guess. And so it was like, what, in history, right, in ancient history, Rome goes through all sorts of turmoils, as we'll see in this movie. So it's not out of the question to just, Rome is at a time of peace and then other things happen that, make Rome on the brink of war and on the brink of turmoil. And so, yeah, I mean, that part in itself was not unbelievable. But at the end of Gladiator 1, I was just like, I mean, sure, you could make a Gladiator 2, but you're really going to have to justify the story to make it, seem like you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. Also, Ridley Scott has been on a bit of a cold streak lately with Napoleon and House of Gucci. And so it just kind of is at this point where it's like, okay, prove me wrong, Ridley Scott, because obviously he's a fantastic filmmaker, obviously. But recently, I mean, Hollywood is a bit of what have you done for me lately? And I think that Ridley Scott's recent filmography has not been super inspiring, to say the least. So went into Gladiator 2 with just the expectations of, I hope it's good and it's entertaining, and we'll go from there. I think Gladiator 2 is a worthy sequel. I honestly, it's really kind of hard to compare to the first movie because it feels pretty seamless. And I don't know. Like, I'm not one of those people who's seen the first Gladiator 20 times and, I think it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I've seen it once. I liked it a lot the first time, but I feel like, especially to call a movie one of the greatest of all times, I have to see that movie over and over and over again to really appreciate it. And I've seen Gladiator once and I really liked it. So in the same vein, I saw Gladiator 2 once, and I also really liked it. It's pretty long, I will say, just to start out with pacing. I think the movie is paced pretty well, but I do think that there are points, especially towards the beginning, where you kind of are sitting in your seat and going, is this what I think this is going to be? Which we'll talk a little bit more in the spoiler discussion. That just kind of makes you go, oh, this might be not as interesting as I thought. But there are always interesting things going on, even within those parts of the story that are maybe a little slower, or a little bit more like, oh, I wish they wouldn't go this direction. But eventually they kind of steer towards a different direction. I know I'm being very vague. I just don't want to spoil anything here. But let's talk about, we talked about pacing. Let's talk about characters, right? So you have these amazing, fantastic actors in this film. You have Paul Mescal, who is playing the main character, and then you have, I guess it's not a spoiler, the main gladiator, right? Denzel Washington, one of the greatest actors of all time. You have Pedro Pascal, one of the greatest actors right now, currently. I mean, he's one of the hottest actors right now, I should say. You also have Joseph Quinn, who is from Stranger Things, and obviously is going to be Human Torch in the Fantastic Four. Really exciting. Connie Nielsen is back. Maybe that's a spoiler. I don't think that's a spoiler. It's in all the marketing. It's on the posters. It's like she's back, and we'll see where that leads. But she's in the movie as well. I don't think I'm missing anybody. I might be missing someone really big, but those are the main players. And so all of these characters, what I love about this film, honestly, is that I think the first film, right, the first Gladiator film, while there is complexity within these characters, pretty clearly Commodus is the bad guy. I mean, Commodus is that kind of archetypal emperor who is, power hungry, and he's going to do whatever it takes to get the throne and all these kinds of things, right? And he to secure the throne. In this movie, there are characters that are, let's say, a little bit unhinged and a little bit, on the crazier evil side for sure. But then there are other characters who are, I would say, villainous, right? Actually, I would say the main antagonist of the film, again, not spoiling anything for people who don't know. I personally didn't know who the main villain was going into this movie, and I was very interested to see this all play out. And I think the main villain of this movie, the antagonist, has very complex, I would not say motivations. I think the motivations are pretty clear, but complex methodologies and kind of a psychology and very interesting ways of going about doing what they're doing. But it's not just one person. There are multiple people in this film who are kind of vying for power and going through all these things. And I think that even the main characters, the quote-unquote protagonists like Paul Mescal as the main gladiator, also very complex characters who have gone through a lot of things that lead them to the places that they are entering the film and then going through the film, right? I think that is one of the biggest strengths of this movie, is that when characters are talking to one another, it's not just conversations of, I'm going to win my freedom and I'm going to, destroy everything evil. It's like, and on the other side, it's like, I'm going to destroy the good guy. It's not quite like that. Which again, I know that's not at all what the first Gladiator was either. The first Gladiator definitely had complexities in it as well. But I think that one of the big things that I enjoyed watching were just characters talking, because the characters in this film and the actors portraying them are so charismatic and so captivating that it's really one of the strengths of this movie. I mean, Denzel Washington, again, it's Denzel Washington, but every time he comes on screen, you can't help but go, wow, it's Denzel Washington. He eats up scenery like nobody's business. There's a reason He is one of the greatest actors of all time. He is amazing. Paul Mescal as well, really good in the role, I think. And other supporting characters, they do really well for the roles that they're given. Like, other characters are not maybe given as much screen time, but it's really, it's about Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, Joseph Quinn, Connie Nielsen, and Paul Mescal. Those are the main characters that I listed. It's really about them. And there are other characters who do, play supporting roles, but it's about those characters and a couple others that I can't remember off the top of my head. So, really good stuff there. I think the story is interesting because, again, like I said, there are certain points where you go, I maybe wish they didn't go in that specific direction, even though what I'm watching is pretty entertaining. But then, I think there are other points where the story kind of dips and dives in ways that you're not expecting, right? Because I think one of the fears that I had about a Gladiator 2, especially after having watched the first one, is this just going to be a carbon copy of Gladiator? And I think that the film does a good job of at least explaining why things are the way that they are and how this film is building upon the legacy of that first film. Legacy meaning not, in a meta way, but in, the events of the film itself. Like how the events of the first film are having its ramifications on this now later iteration of Rome, right? I think that that's really interesting. Speaking of Rome, I think Rome in itself plays a bigger part than it did in the first Gladiator film because, in the first Gladiator, there's this whole thing about Maximus saying, I'm going to get the army and we're going to storm Rome, and we don't really see that. But I think in this film, Rome is a little bit more of a character. Rome's geopolitics and sort of the machinations of what's going on within the Senate and within with the emperor and all these different things that are happening, within Rome as a ruling state, right? Like, is it, an empire? I mean, sure, it's an empire, but, should it be an empire? And how, what power do the people have? All these different questions that are being raised, I think, are super interesting. And, especially, I think, given just the way that our world is today, too, it has a lot to say, honestly. Like, I think there are certain scenes, and I'm not going to go into politics here, not the channel for that, but I think just to kind of say that there are scenes in this film where you go, it is ancient Rome that's going, that you're seeing in this film. But also, if this were just set in modern times and you kind of thought about this as just any other authoritarian state, it would be really interesting to think about it in that way as well. So I think that there's a lot of commentary in this film where it's not just about watching, gladiators fight in the ring, but, there's a lot there as well. I think that the film, I think once it gets its footing, going back to the pacing, works really well in the sense that it builds and builds, and I think the climax is very satisfying. Honestly, I was not expecting that because I kind of thought, again, is it going in this one direction? It doesn't, and I think that works really well in the film's favor in that regard. And I think finally, just to close out this non-spoiler section, you have to talk about the action. The action's great. I mean, there are some scenes that are very memorable and not in a bad way, obviously. I just in a way that these scenes stick with you. There are a couple action sequences towards the beginning and a lot of fights, but again, it doesn't feel like fights just for the sake of doing fights for stylized action or whatever. It feels very warranted, and I think every action sequence has stakes to it. I think most of them do. They're not just spectacle, even though obviously the irony is that gladiator fights are there for spectacle, but I really do think that a lot of the action sequences are quite good as well. So, is it a perfect movie? I mean, no movie, in my opinion, is perfect, but, I think that aside from a couple things, I think that the film is a little bit long. I think some of the pacing and some of the direction that they were going towards the beginning made me a little bit nervous, but ultimately, I really enjoyed the film. I think that it went in a way that I thought, made sense for these characters. And a lot of the character dynamics were really great. The action was really great. And, I think I asked myself this question of what more could you want from a Gladiator film? And this is it. I mean, it's great. And I'm really happy that I walked out of the theater with that kind of experience. So that is my non-spoiler review for Gladiator 2. We are now going to transition into the spoiler discussion. Not going to go on for too long here, because I think this isn't a film that's like, I don't know, Avengers Endgame, where there's so many spoilery things to talk about here. I'm stalling a little bit to give you time. If you haven't seen Gladiator 2, just save the video to watch later and then come back to this part of the review at any point. So let's get into some spoilers for Gladiator 2. I know I had to be pretty vague in the non-spoiler section for those of you who have stuck around from the non-spoiler section. The kinds of things I was alluding to. So first of all, just the direction of the film that was making me nervous. I was nervous at a certain point of is this just going to be a not shot for shot, that's not the right term, but is this just going to be basically Gladiator 1 with different characters, right? That's what I was nervous about. I think towards the beginning, that fear and trepidation was pretty big because, I mean, you have this character Lucius, right? Now I can say Lucius. I know it was revealed in a trailer, but, just in case people didn't know. But Lucius, right? So at the beginning, he's fighting this battle, and then he loses his wife, and he has this vision. It's not the grain fields or whatever. It's this river kind of thing, but it's the same kind of deal. He goes in, he has a kind of mini gladiator fight outside of Rome, and then he goes into Rome, and then he trains, and at that point I was like, are we just watching Gladiator 1? Which, again, it was good. I mean, this film, at that point I was like, it's good, but I would rather have something a little bit more substantial. Just, I think that one of the things I had asked myself was, what is going to justify Gladiator 2 being made? And at that point I was like, well, it's entertaining, this Gladiator 2 film, but it's not really speaking to me on that level of like, why did this need to be made? But then I think the film kind of dives into other characters. I think the Paul Mescal character is really good, but I think that he is pretty much mirroring Maximus's journey in a lot of the key ways. Not every single way. Like I want to be clear, they're not the exact same character, obviously. And I think that going back to the climax part, at the very end, I love how it's not another one-on-one fight. I was very worried it was going to be a one-on-one fight that was going to end in the Colosseum, just like it was in the first Gladiator. I'm glad it was still a one-on-one fight, but it was a very satisfying matchup between, is it Macrinus? Macrinus, right? Denzel Washington's character and Lucius outside of Rome and representing the idea that Rome, we're going to rebuild the dream of Rome. I think that's awesome. It was a great action sequence there. But, like I was saying, I think it's the other characters that make this film, I think, more than just another Gladiator movie. Because the first Gladiator film was about Maximus at its core. This film is about Lucius for sure, but it's really diving into other characters. Like Macrinus, I have to say, Denzel Washington is awesome. I mean, he plays this character who is cruel and calculating, but so charismatic, and he gets what he wants. He's so in control here. He wants power, but he's not one of those maniacal villains. He is so commanding. All these C words, right? But he's so commanding, charismatic, in control. I love this performance by Denzel Washington. It was awesome to see, just oozing charisma every single scene. And I think that, honestly, at first I was like, Pedro Pascal is just going to be that jerk general character, that you see in a lot of movies. But I love how they treated the character of Pedro Pascal. I think that Achaeus was great because he has so many dimensions to him that by the time you had that one-on-one match between Lucius and Achaeus, there was real tension in me where I was like, we've been rooting for this Lucius character to kind of get his revenge and seek vengeance for his life and his wife, right? That did not mean to rhyme there. For his wife. I meant to say his wife. For his wife, because Achaeus was the one who sacked Numidia and partially the reason why his wife was killed. But then you also see Achaeus, and he's, I think, genuinely, living at a time where obviously killing is part of the deal. And again, not to justify killing, but, he's a general and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it was very clear he did not enjoy the direction that Rome was going under these crazy emperors. Is it Caligula? Caligula? Is that how Caligula and Geta? I don't remember their names, honestly. I'm just going to call them Joseph Quinn and the monkey emperor, because I just don't remember their names. But, Rome was kind of in shambles under these two emperors, right? It was clear that the direction that they were going in was tyranny. And lest you think that, Roman emperors making their monkeys first consul, was that the title? First consul is crazy and it's hard to believe. This is ancient history. This is what Roman emperors did. There were emperors like Nero and Caligula and, other emperors that just did crazy, terrible and brutal things, but crazy things. So, no, I mean, the monkey being named first consul was the least of my, suspensions of disbeliefs, because I just think that this is just ancient history. It's what happened. So anyways, but I going back to Pedro Pascal, I love that the character was humanized in that way so that by the time they have their one-on-one, there are stakes there, right? I think the Denzel Washington and Pedro Pascal, Paul Mescal, these are really confusing names. All these Latin names and then all these, names that sound the same in English anyways. But the final fight there, it had real stakes. It had a drive to it. It was like, we're fighting for the sake of Rome and the direction of Rome. Especially because, Macrinus had sent it into such anarchy by killing the emperors. And so I think that was really good. I think Lucilla Connie Nielsen's character, maybe not the strongest character in this film. I enjoyed that she was there and she had some good emotional moments with Lucius, but again, maybe not the strongest character arc in this movie in my opinion. But Connie Nielsen is always good. She's always good there, and I actually really like that Robbie character as well. The healer, the doctor, he was really good as well. Again, the film, surprisingly, it has great action. The monkey fights at the beginning, really entertaining. The boat fight was really great. Obviously, the 2 solo combat scenes were great as well. And then when when the kind of populist revolt happens, it was great. But the action in that was great. But I think the surprising thing to me about this movie was that it rides on the strengths of its characters, and that's not something I expected to say from Gladiator 2, but it's definitely something I felt. The performances were great, the characters were great, and I walked out of it, like I said, having a great time. So guys, I'm assuming that if you're still here, you have seen Gladiator 2. What did you think about it? And does it live up to the original? Let me know in the comments down below. I can't wait to talk about other films like Wicked and Moana 2. But for now, let me know what you thought about Gladiator 2 in the comments down below. Alright, so with the DCU, because we're transitioning now from the DCEU, which had all the Justice League films and Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, we're transitioning now into a rebooted universe with the DC characters. And I'm very excited for it. I think that there's a lot of potential here with Brave and the Bold, Paradise Lost, Superman, Creature Commandos, maybe a little less excited. But, I think there's a lot of potential here with the new universe. But one question that if you've been watching the channel, listening to the podcasts for a while, you'll know has been on my mind is what parts of the old DCEU are canon to the new DCU? I think actually, one might be tempted to say, well, surely none of it because it's a reboot, right? It's a rebooted universe. We're getting a whole new Superman. That question, though, has been a little bit more in the gray area than I think a lot of us may have anticipated. And I think the reason is because James Gunn did a lot in the post-Snyder Cut version of the DCEU. He did, the Suicide Squad, he did Peacemaker, but also, if you guys remember, the characters from Peacemaker, including Harcourt and Economos, showed up in Black Adam and also showed up at the end of Shazam! Fury of the Gods to recruit Shazam to the Justice Society. So James Gunn had a lot of, creative liberties within the end of the DCEU. And obviously he took over right as they were releasing the final 4 projects, right? Which were Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which was Blue Beetle, The Flash, and then obviously Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And so it's interesting because with the announcement of the slate of the new DCU, there were a lot of projects that had reprising roles from actors from the previous regime, from the previous DCEU. It's really interesting also because, right out of the gate, we're getting Creature Commandos, which is basically Suicide Squad 2, or 3, I guess, depending on but James Gunn Suicide Squad 2, Superman, that's a break, but then we get Peacemaker Season 2, literally Season 2, Peacemaker Season 2, and then we're also getting a Waller series, apparently, at some point. So a lot of these projects have carryover from the old DCEU. And the question was, what parts of those projects will be canon? That's really been my big question of how much are you going to take from those old projects and bring it into your new DCEU? Now, there's a separate question here about how much should be canon, because honestly, personally, I might have been more on board of let's just reboot the whole thing and just start over. But I understand, I'm sure James Gunn was so beholden and attached to his characters, Peacemaker and Amanda Waller and whatnot, that he felt like he had to bring them over. Again, I would have maybe preferred a hard reboot, and I love Peacemaker, by the way. It's nothing to do with Peacemaker's quality, but that may be what I would have preferred, been my preferred option. So James Gunn, I think in promoting Creature Commandos, has been doing a lot of interviews lately, and there's some really interesting things he's been saying. I'm going to go over really quickly just a couple of little nuggets that I saw that aren't really related to the main topic of this segment, which is the canonicity of the old DCEU, but there are just some other things that are very interesting. Like, for example, James Gunn has said that he'd be interested in the Creature Commandos coming back and maybe even in a theatrical form. And I think that, he's implied before that he wouldn't be opposed to even doing animated theatrical films as well. So yeah, Creature Commandos, if it goes well, then I'm sure we'll see them again very soon. He's also said there's going to be a lot of other R-rated films coming up in the DCU. That's interesting. And then he's also confirmed that a Superman trailer is not too far away, and he's also confirmed that he will be directing more projects in the DCU. He just hasn't picked which one, and he said something like he has 4 or 5 projects to pick from at this point in time. He says they're doing a lot of things, and so he has a lot to pick from. So that's all interesting. That's all well and good. But now, let's get to the bigger, broader topic here of the canonicity, right? What is canon in the DCU? And he gave an interview where he talked about Peacemaker, talked about season 2 of Peacemaker, and just talked about what storylines are gonna carry over. So I'm gonna read some quotes here, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So this is an article here that has a lot of the quotes, and it says, the first one says, quote, "Now in Creature Commandos, you'll hear them talk about things that happen in the Suicide Squad or Peacemaker. Well then, those things are automatically become canon in the DCU." Okay. That makes some sense, especially because the character of, they point out the character of Weasel is literally coming back, and also Viola Davis's Amanda Waller is coming back. So makes some sense in that regard if you're doing this, okay? The second quote is, quote, "The truth is almost all of Peacemaker is canon with the exception of Justice League, which we will kind of deal with in the next season of Peacemaker." Okay. So that's also interesting. And then let me scroll down. I think those were the only two major quotes that I wanted to talk about here. But I think that that's interesting because I think that's what we all kind of suspected is obviously the Justice League cameo. You can't really have Jason Momoa, Ezra Miller, because they're not reprising their roles as Flash and Aquaman. And so that's obviously not going to be canon. But he seems to, think, he is in charge. So he says that basically all of Peacemaker is canon to the DCU. And by extension, he also says the Suicide Squad is canon in the DCU as well. And I guess his defining line, right, the hard line that he's taking, is whatever is mentioned in Creature Commandos and future DCU projects that refer back to the old projects are going to be canon. Now, it's interesting because my first thought, before he said that was, does that mean by extension Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn in this DCU? What does that mean for all those characters that were associated with those projects? But he seems to be saying that it's really all the things that for the Suicide Squad at least, all the things that they mention about the Suicide Squad that, that automatically become canon to the DCU. Whereas, for Peacemaker, he seems to be just saying all of Peacemaker is canon except for the Justice League scene, the cameo at the end of that series. Now, again, we can have all these different conversations about whether or not this should be the case, whether or not it should be the case, but I will say it's a little bit confusing because I think that by having this much continuity and carryover, I do wonder, right? Because I know that James Gunn is very confident and committed into the quality of the DCU, and obviously the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker were very well received. I'm just curious if there will be people out there who see trailers for Creature Commandos or who sees a trailer for Waller when that comes out, or Peacemaker Season 2, and they go, oh, they're just continuing on the old DCEU. And then they see a new Superman movie and they're like, what is this? Is this the Joker? Kind of like Joker? Is this like the Batman? Is this all different? So I wonder if there's going to be some heavy lifting that James Gunn has to do in order to make this make sense for the general going movie audience. I'd be very curious about that. But anyways, we have our answer. It seems like whatever is mentioned in the new DCU that alludes to the previous projects, the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker in particular, seems to be that, those are going to be canon. Those little aspects at least are going to be canon. And then also all of Peacemaker except for the Justice League scene is going to be canon. So that clears it up a little bit. Although again, remains to be seen about other things like Jolo Maraduena, I believe, is going to be voicing Blue Beetle again. So who knows if that film is going to be canon to the DCU? Honestly, I have no idea. We'll see about that. But yeah, the more that James Gunn can clear this up, I think the better we will all be for it. So guys, let me know in the comments down below. Are you one of those people like me who maybe thinks they should have just done a hard reboot and started all over, even though you love Peacemaker or the Suicide Squad? Or do you think this is fine and this will all make sense in the end and they'll just figure a way out? Let me know in the comments down below. And everyone, that will do it for episode number 50. We're halfway to 100. It's crazy. It's so crazy to think about. Thank you guys so much for joining me, as always, on the Access Blockbusters pod. Here's to 50 more episodes, guys. If you are watching or listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. And let me know in the comments what you think about the podcast, if you'd like me to cover anything else, if you'd like me to try new formats. I've always been open to doing rankings, tier lists, even anything that's, fun and engaging for you guys in with this podcast and with what I'm covering. It's, I'm game to really try a lot of things. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys are interested in. But thank you guys so much again for listening, and I will see you guys next week for episode 51. I'll see you guys in the next one.